is the Happy Scientist Podcast. Each episode is designed to make you more focused, more productive, and more satisfied in the lab. You can find us online at bitesizebio.com/happyscientist. Your hosts are Kenneth Vogt, founder of the executive coaching firm Vera Claritas, and Dr. Nick Oswald, PhD, bioscientist, and founder of Bitesize Bio.
Hello, this is Nick Oswald. Welcome you to this Bitesize Bio webinar, which today is a live episode of the Happy Scientist podcast. If you want to become a happier, healthier, and more productive scientist, you're in the right place. With me, as always, is the Bitesize Bio team's Mr. Miyagi, Mr. Kenneth Vogt. In these sessions, we hear from Ken mostly on principles that will help shape you for a happier and more successful career. And along the way, I'll pitch in with points from my personal experience as a scientist and from working with Ken. If you have any questions on the way, put them into the questions box on the side or below your screen, and I will put them to Ken along the way. And today we are discussing catalysts for advancement of your scientific career. Ken, what's this all about?
Okay. Well, first thing I want to point out is the key word there is catalyst. It's, we could talk about things you could do to advance your scientific career, but in this specific instance, I'm going to talk about the things that make a rapid change in your opportunity, in your career, just like a catalyst does. Now, we could talk about catalyst from the standpoint of a chemist. We could talk about catalyst from the standpoint of a bioscientist. And, those are specific areas of expertise, and there's specific knowledge there, specific opportunity there to use catalyst for certain scientific purposes. But we're going to borrow that. Now, we've talked about this before, about borrowing from other areas of expertise, other areas of industry, and bringing them to science. Well, this time we're going to talk about borrowing from science to bring to your career in science. So there's a number of ways that catalysts can help you in that regard. So we're going to cover them today. Now, the first point of, what is catalyst all about? Now, I realize we could go back to Chemistry 101, and even I've had Chemistry 101, right? But I'm not a scientist like y'all, and you probably have some very clear notions about what catalyst is, what it's for, what it can do, what it can't do, what dangers it introduces. All of that is there for you. Now, I can use a very simple definition for catalyst and say it's when a substance is used to increase the rate of a chemical reaction without itself undergoing any permanent chemical change. Now, an example of that is chlorine acts as a catalyst to break down ozone. Now, I realize you could hear that and go, well, that's a very high school version of what catalyst is about. And yes, it is. And I want it to be that way because I want to show how this can transfer to the idea of career advancement, because all of it's not going to come along. It's not going to be quite so, universally applicable. But there are parts of it that are completely transfer from one to the other. And the whole point of this is we want to create a transformation. And if you think about your career and think about transformation, there probably aren't that many points in your career that you would describe that way. There are things you've done along the way that have moved you along, and that's all fine. But transformation is a different story. That's a big deal. And a transformation can really, really up your prospects and really change things for you. So that being said, then since they're so important, you really gotta look for them, because they don't happen that often. And just to use an example, depending on where you are in your career, you probably have had points where something major changed. Now, that could be true even if you're brand new. The major change was you got that first job in the lab, and that's a big deal. And that doesn't happen every day. But other things happen too. You have, where you move from, and Nick, I'll lean on you a little bit for this. When you first enter the lab and you're you're a junior researcher. I don't know. What's the label for that? What do you call somebody who's brand new to it?
I don't know. Well, I mean, my experience, it was you were the PhD student, but that's probably most people's path. But
okay,
yeah,
and that's fine. But at some point, you go from that to something else, and maybe it's a PI, but probably there's something interim before that. There are stages like that, but it takes a transformation to get to each of them, and they're different. They're different jobs. What you do as a PI is quite a bit different than what you do as a PhD student that's supporting some research project. So the transformation is necessary not just in you changed roles, but you change what you do. So that I'm bringing that up to point out that these are really worth looking for, because you could stay in a very simplistic role. You could enter a lab and pretty much be the guy that cleans the test tubes for the next 20 years, unless you make some transformations, right? And to make those transformations, you're going to need some catalysts, because they're not easy transformations. You don't go from one thing to the other without there being some effort, maybe even some pain, and you got to have opportunities. So we got to make that happen. So one of the first things that's important then is recognizing catalyst. Well, what is a catalyst to improve my career? Well, that's going to come down to the stories that you tell. You're going to label certain things as being important, and you're going to not label certain things. Some things are just going to go on by. But what you grab onto matters. When you see, hey, there's somebody here who could really mentor me, and I can see they're willing. If I'm willing to do the part of being the mentee, if I'm willing to support whatever their objectives are, so you when you see those things, you gotta make hay while the sun shines. You have to pick up on those things. If you never add the chlorine, the ozone doesn't break down. Now you can know where the chlorine is and know it's available and know what it can do, but until you take action on it, nothing will happen.
Right, can I just, in the scientific context, and it is applicable to what you're talking about here, it would just happen much more slowly.
Yeah, well, there's that.
It's kind of what you're alluding to here as well, isn't it?
Yeah, this is about using catalyst as an accelerant. Yeah. So it's not to say that you're not going to automatically move up in your career. I mean, just by virtue of having years on your resume, something's going to happen. Mm-hmm. But do you want it to take the longest it possibly can? Probably not. Now there's another kind of catalyst, and this may be even more important than the standard ones. You know that, hey, to reach a certain qualification, I have to get certain certifications. I have to take certain classes to get the certifications. There's a set path that's already known in there, and if you want to go down that road, or if it's necessary to go down that road, you'll do what needs to be done. But often there are catalysts that are unanticipated events, things you didn't see coming, and they offer you huge opportunities, and they can really affect the timeline of your career advancement. So when something comes up, you may have a chance to be a hero. You may have a chance to be the person that puts their hands up and says, I'll take on that task. I'll go to that conference. I'll prepare the paper, whatever it is. Those are things that you may not have known in advance. You may not have known that this particular research was going to work out so successfully, and somebody's got to talk about it. You might have hoped that'd be the case, but you didn't know what would happen. Now the unknown has happened. And sometimes the unknown that happens isn't necessarily positive, or at least doesn't look positive at first glance. It might be an emergency that happens. Somebody drops out of the lab for whatever reason. They quit, they get sick, and somebody's got to fill their shoes. And you recognize that this is an opportunity for me to speed up the path of my career. You got to take action on it. You got to use that catalyst, because it'll sit there for a minute, but it may be that somebody else will pick it up and run with it. So it's up to you to decide, what are you going to do? So let's look at the difference between, say, a strong catalyst and a weak catalyst. And I like the metaphor of the strong force and the weak force from physics. And again, I realize it's such a mixing of metaphors. We're talking chemistry, we're talking physics, we're talking bioscience, and the only one I can speak even semi-intelligently about is physics. So sometimes that's just what comes to mind for me. But the notion of the strong force versus the weak force, they both have a function, and they're very important. In fact, physical reality would not exist without the strong force and the weak force. And as you may recall from your physics classes back in the day, the strong force is an attractive force between protons and neutrons that holds them together in a nucleus. That really matters. And it's strong because the natural state of things is things that have a positive charge will try to push away from each other. So for them to stick together really takes a lot of power. Now, the weak force, on the other hand, is the force that allows for beta decay, and it allows neutrons. Allows the neutrons to release an electron, say, so it turns back into a proton, and then you've got radiation, and you've got electrons free and available to be used for molecules. So again, it's not as strong a force, doesn't need to be. It's very localized. It's right there. You're going to find you have catalysts available to you that are just like that. Some of them are going to be gigantic, and some of them may be like you have to fight for. Even it's kind of like, this is the conference to be at, and we're not going to send everybody, and you got to make sure you're on that list. That may be a strong catalyst, and there are people there I can meet that are going to change my career, that or potentially can. I want to know people in my field, and I want them to meet me. I want them to hear me. I want them to interact with me. Other things are going to be smaller. They don't have to be as strong. It may just be an opportunity to put your hand up and say, "Hey, don't worry about it. I'll wrap up this experiment for tonight. You can go, you can go work on something else, or you can go get some sleep, or whatever it is they need." And you're earning some points with somebody that matters, that will matter to you in your career. So, just because it's a weak catalyst doesn't mean it's not worth it. You keep layering in those things, and they can really matter. Now, the thing about a strong catalyst is it can be a make or break kind of thing. It's like, well, if I screw this up, man, I really blew an opportunity, or even damaged myself. Whereas with weak catalyst, it tends to be a bunch of just a piling on. And even if you screw it up, it's not that big a deal, because there'll be another opportunity to add something again later, or next time, or with the next person. So again, you have to have your eyes open for these things so you see them, because the weak catalyst can just go winging right by without you noticing. But if you bother to notice, and you bother to make that just part of your normal operation, you're the person that can be counted on to say yes, and to join up. You're the person that puts their hand up to say, I'm willing to do the documentation, or I'm willing to do the final check on the report. Whatever it is, stuff you don't have to do, but you do because it's creating a reputation. You're becoming the person that, this is the go-to person. This is the person we can count on. This is the person that goes the extra mile. Those are all useful things. And they may not have a lot to do with scientific expertise, but they're necessary for the operation, for what has to happen. Now, the strong catalyst may be the thing where you really got to step up and show your stuff as a scientist. You got to be the person that can make that presentation and have it be well received. You got to be the person that can communicate what has been learned here, or to communicate what has failed here. Failures are as important to document as successes. So,
So can I cut across this, Ken, for a second? And I think as scientists, the definition is where it's at, right? And so what you're talking about as a catalyst is something in terms of your scientific career, which is on the title of the webinar, is, as I'm gleaning it from what you're saying here, a catalyst is some event or are events that are available to you that pop up in your scientific career that depending on what the choice you make, then they can give you growth or progress or advancement. And in general, those are things that you might just not want to do or not want to deal with. So maybe, I just wrote down, in terms of the weak catalyst, little things you can do that build you, right? One thing that someone said to me way back when I was, when you go to a lab meeting, so the lab meeting is everyone's discussing their research, you can just sit there and take it in, right? That's fine. But you should challenge yourself to ask a question at every lab meeting, because then it forces you to understand what's going on and to participate and put yourself out there. And if you do that, that layers on confidence. But it's not something you could easily avoid that. Or you could choose to use that as a catalyst to layer on growth. Yeah?
Sure.
Right.
And I would even imply you can get better at it. In other words, maybe you're not asking questions because you feel every time I ask a question, it's stupid. Well, get better at asking questions and be prepared to ask your questions. Because there's one other thing about this that pops up along the lines of definition. Your problems are often catalysts.
Mm-hmm.
So, and you may push away from those. You go, well, I don't want to use that kind of catalyst. Well, you should, because one thing's for sure, you're going to have problems. I mean, we have to face problems. We have to deal with problems. They are part of the game. And in fact, that kind of goes to the next slide. These catalyst is inevitable. Problems are inevitable. So why not get some benefit from it? And I love that the suggestion you were just making about make sure you ask a question every time you're in a lab meeting. Yeah. And then take it up a notch. Make sure you ask a good question every time you're there. And then you can look at ways, can I ask questions that will be beneficial to the other people present, beneficial to the presenter? Is there a way then that I can show myself to be a team player by the questions I'm asking? And I show myself to be someone with imagination in a beneficially scientific way. Get something out of it. And make sure, and getting something out of it too may be that somebody else gets something out of it. The benefit doesn't have to be directly personal, but when you're known as the person who benefits others, ultimately it will benefit you. So then on the next point on that, now that you've recognized you have catalysts and you recognize your problems are catalysts, you recognize what is available to you, we'll start curating that. That is, start working with how am I going to focus on planned catalysts? The things I know I have to do, the certifications, the conferences I ought to attend, the papers I need to write. How am I going to work with that catalyst? And then how am I going to deal with an unanticipated catalyst? Now, by its the definition right there, it's unanticipated. Well, how am I supposed to do that? You actually can anticipate some things that are unanticipated. What I mean is, you may not know when it's going to happen, but you know that a certain kind of thing is going to pop up. That you can tell there are people here in my lab that are going to enter into conflict at some point. It's already there. So I can be the person to help smooth that over. So you can plan in advance for the opportunity there to show that you're a leader and you're a team player, even though you don't know when it's going to be called on. And then, of course, there are going to be the things you just can't see coming. But when it happens, are you going to react with fear and pulling back and hiding, or are you going to react with I'm going to be the protector here. I'm going to be the person who takes charge in this setting. Those are the opportunities to use unanticipated catalysts that you just didn't see coming at all. But as you do that, you get one under your belt. You're going to be a little more confident next time. You get 2 under your belt. You're going to be more confident. By the time it's happened several times, it's like, I'm ready for anything. And that feels so great. And that is so beneficial in career advancement, because legitimate confidence that is based on something that other people have observed, that will help a great deal when it comes to important assignments or cherry opportunities. You're going to be the person that is going to be looked to as like, this is someone we can give this to because they're going to succeed with it. They're going to take this somewhere, and you want to be that person. But that comes from setting it up in advance. Start with the planned catalyst, move to the unanticipated catalyst, and then move to the just out of the blue catalyst, and make sure you've got that on your resume, as it were. So the next thing you can do then is not just wait for catalysts to show up. You can create catalysts. And I like the idea of creating beneficial catalysts. And when it came to beneficials, I had to go to my own love for gardening. And the first thing I saw in my head was a ladybug. They call them beneficials. Now, I'm sure we're talking to a bunch of biologists here. I'm sure you're as up on this as any gardener is, and probably more so. And you know it at a deeper level. But that ladybug is there, and it's pretty. It's beautiful. I love being around something like that. And I mean, it'll walk on your hand, and it doesn't bite you, and it eats all the aphids, which is great. Eat the aphids, please. And so, if you find there's a deficit somewhere, well, I could really use some more catalysts in this place. I need a way to advance something in this particular area. And maybe I need to be a better communicator, whether that's spoken or written. Okay, well, how are you going to create some beneficial catalysts there? It could be even a language barrier. Well, there are definitely tools out there to get better at language. And if it's not a language barrier, maybe it's a matter of, I need to be more empathetic. I need to think more about what the other person needs to hear. Because communication is a two-way street. It's not just you talking, but it's about them hearing. And there's even a step beyond that. It's not just you talking, it's what you actually mean to communicate. And then from the other side, it's not just what they hear, but it's what they understand. You can dig deeper into that and go, how can I get better at making sure that they understand? How can I do better at making sure that what I say actually matches what I'm trying to communicate? Another thing you think about is catalyst isn't just about you. It's about your environment, and it's about other people. So the catalyst that you want to introduce may not even be about you. You can introduce catalysts for other people to help them, to get them to move to the point you want them to get to. Now, if you're actually in charge of some people in the lab, you might want your people to be certified in certain areas. Well, what can you do to facilitate that? How can you make it easier for them to get it done? Can you recommend recommend some kind of study courses? Can you point out to them the schedule of when you have to apply for things? How can you engage that process instead of just letting it kind of motor along all by itself? Because you can sit there and go, oh, I sure wish these guys would get certified for this, instead of, well, make it worth their while. Is there something you can do for them? Hey, for everyone who gets to this level, this is going to happen. You're going to get this, and maybe you have to do more than just offer it, because you may not be able to offer it. You may not be in charge of it. So now you have to go to bat. You got to help create the environment to make that possible. Maybe you got to argue it up the chain. And again, make it clear to them, why do they care? Why would they care that your PhD students get certain things done for you within the lab? Make it valuable to them. And then when you're asking for resources, they're not seeing it as, you want resources. They're seeing it as, we want resources. Make it worth their while, and they'll take it along. But this is all about creating beneficial catalysts. You don't have to create problems like we talked about before. Problems will happen by themselves, but the beneficial things often need a little nudge. They need you to push it along a little bit. But with all these possibilities for Catalyst, you have a lot of opportunities to continue moving up in your career. So that's the Catalyst for career advancement and satisfaction.
Okay, I've been furiously writing notes, as you've been saying.
Okay, go for it.
I'm going to try and translate from Yodaese into sciences. Well, not really. I just give you my my angle on this and see whether you think this rings true. So, as I see it, you're talking about catalysts. So that's events or actions or habits or things or outlooks that that can help you advance as a person and in your career and whatnot. And there are three types. I put them into three broad categories. One of those are things that crops. The first category is things that crop up. Okay, so you encounter a problem or a challenge in your day to day, and how you approach that can decide whether it becomes how good a catalyst it becomes. Okay, so for example, your PhD, for example, your whole PhD study, that's a catalyst because you're putting yourself into a crucible there, into a situation that challenges you. And the more you can go with the flow and put into that rather than pulling back from it and resisting it and complaining about it, the more you're going to get out of it and the more growth you're going to get out of it. And the same as, a lot of people, you hear anecdotal things about, breakdowns being, that when things break down, situations break down, that's a real catalyst for people. It wasn't a choice, but it just happened. Like people who they're laid off, and then they go and it forces them into a situation where they make decisions that are a catalyst for their own growth.
Sure.
Make sense?
Yeah.
So far, okay.
Yep.
The next sort of level of catalysts are what I've called optional catalysts. So you can choose whether you take them on or not, and that would be adding things in like making yourself ask questions, challenging yourself to ask questions at the lab meeting, or accepting the challenge of doing a presentation at a conference, or accepting that you will you help people in the lab. You're going to take on the sort of outlook of that you want to be helpful in the lab. So that would be optional ones. And I suppose there's a optional between the optional and the third category I've created, which is ones that you create. There's kind of an overlap there, but the third one is where you deliberately create catalyst for yourself by going out there and setting things up that will be a challenge to you that you didn't even didn't have to deal with. You could go and set up a journal club or something like that and take responsibility for journal club. That will be that will be an extra responsibility. It will stretch you in ways that your normal day to day wouldn't stretch you, you've chosen to set that up for yourself, and the more you put that into yourself, the more you'll get out of it, the more growth you'll get out of it. I guess when I've heard you talking about this recently, it's mostly been about the things that crop up. Seeing problems as problems in quotes, or challenges and things seemingly going wrong as being a catalyst. So I think that's quite an interesting way to look at it as a scientist, because when you're doing experiments in the lab, things go wrong all the time. Most
exactly.
What would you think about that? About maybe it's about a mindset or something, or
yeah. Well, and just like the difference between how I presented this all, and then you recapped it different than I said it, which is great, because you took something you knew and you applied it. You know about being in the lab, which I don't, right?
Yeah.
So, and as you're describing this, the things going wrong in the lab, I mean, there's all these historical accounts of things going wrong in the lab that led to tremendous breakthroughs. That's kind of kind of the thing you're looking for, right? You wish things would go wrong so that you could learn something. That's the beauty of it. And being in an environment where learning things is rewarded and really looked upon highly is great, because trust me, out in the world, there are plenty of places where that's not the case. Plenty of jobs, plenty of industries where you are not rewarded for having a problem. Not at all. But you, lucky scientists, you get to be. So it really behooves you to have a good attitude about it and to bring the right mindset to it. And yeah, I've often said that every pessimist describes himself as a realist. You never hear an optimist describe himself as a realist. An optimist will tell you they're not a realist, they're an optimist. But pessimists will never admit to it. Well, pessimism it's got to be a fatal flaw for a scientist. You're gonna have a hard time with that kind of career. And if you instead note that your problems are opportunities, and whether you want, I like to use the word problems. I don't like the word challenges as much, because to me it's kind of a sugarcoating of it. But you know what? Problems are problems. And it's good to note them as that, and to not denigrate them for that. A problem isn't evil because it's a problem.
Yeah, however, I would say that what some of the things that have pushed me to growth are things like saying, "Yep, I'm going to stand up at that conference and I'm going to do it."
Yeah,
accept the challenge of doing a talk there.
Mm-hmm.
In a presentation.
Well, that is a challenge. That's not a problem.
That's what I mean by a challenge. Yeah, I wasn't meaning the sugarcoat version of a problem. I was meaning rising to a challenge.
Yeah. Well, and of course, the first time it might be a problem. I've never done this before. I don't know how.
For me, it always becomes I rise to the challenge, and then it becomes a problem that I go, why wouldn't I just say I don't want to do this, and then make myself do it, and then outside the other end of that crucible, then you see that you've grown. And
right,
and that's one example for me anyway.
Yeah, and if you can get past that notion of oh, why did I accept this, and to start to realize, you know what, that's what I said the last time I accepted things and it worked out fine.
Right. I used to have a pattern of accepting these things and then actually cancelling, right at the last minute and stuff, and I was like, oh, let's stop doing that, just follow through. But well, I really like the metaphor of this being a catalyst, right, for a few reasons. But one of them is that, so the definition is that a catalyst increases the rate of the reaction, in science. And the way that it does it is by forcing two things to stay in proximity.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Like by the shape of an enzyme, it makes the two reactants go together and stay together until the reaction happens. And this is what this is all about. A lot of this stuff you would just bounce off, and you wouldn't tackle the fear of standing up in front of people that you think know better than you, unless you were forced yourself into that crucible of, okay, there's no option now.
Right.
And the little thing about the asking a question at every lab meeting, you're in a smaller way, you're forcing yourself to stand up and take, acquire the experience. Right. And so I do like the idea of that, the catalysis for that reason. You're literally speeding up the growth of yourself by forcing yourself into these solutions. And some of it are being forced into the solutions, but your attitude is what defines how much you get out of it. So a challenge comes up, a problem comes up, the lab doesn't get funding or whatever, and you can run away from it, or you can face it and do your best, and then come out of it with more experience and more growth and more more savvy at the end of it, that allows you to deal with even more catalysts in the future.
Right. Well, in a situation like the example you pointed out, if you're asking a question, you're getting the spotlight on you. You're taking the microphone.
That's the idea.
And what's going to happen then? Well, you're going to be seen more clearly. And guess what? Your flaws and your impurities are going to be more obvious, and they are going to impact things. Mm-hmm. That's how it is, folks. But as you get more experience with this, you'll purify, and you'll learn how to separate out the impurities in such a way that they won't cause any harm. And you'll get better at it. And you only get good at things by doing things when you're not yet good at them. How else do you expect perfection before you can actually put it into practice? That's just not realistic. And that's not how it is in the rest of your world either. And I use the notion of catalyst specifically because it has a deep, rich meaning to you already in the scientific context. Now I'm asking you to take that and figure out, how can I apply this in this other area? What part of it works? And it's okay to also notice there's certain parts of it that just don't map. I can't bring that over. Fine. But what can you bring over? That's the part that matters.
Yeah. Fantastic.
All right. Well, okay. That's about all I got for now. Yeah. Let's see you have more.
Thank you, Ken. No, that's some really great insight. And again, the more you look at the definition of a catalyst and in different contexts, you can look at these, what Ken's describing here, these problems, challenges, situations that you can put yourself into, or that you're going to be forced into, and you can just allow yourself to be open to, so that and allow yourself to acquire the growth that comes from them. Then the better you'll be. But yeah, I find it quite funny because I've heard you saying this quite a lot, and I had a look at the definition of catalyst, and yeah, it goes a bit more 3D when you do that, actually.
Sure. Yeah, I love this. You challenged me on that. Like, hey, wait a minute.
Okay, thanks also to the audience for listening in, whether that be live today or on demand, and we hope you found some benefit from the episode. So please look out for more Happy Scientist episodes in the coming months. You can find them listed on events.bitesizebio.com and on the Happy Scientist Facebook page at facebook.com/The Happy Scientist Podcast. That's all one word. Until then, good luck in your research and goodbye from all of us at Bitesize Bio.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Happy Scientist Podcast, helping you to become a happier, healthier, and more productive scientist. To get more Happy Scientist podcast episodes and all of our downloadables, please go to bitesizebio.com/The Happy Scientist, all one word. And in particular, you might want to spend some time on episodes 1 to 9, where we talk about the foundational principles of human needs, core mindsets, and charisma factors, which we refer to in many episodes. You can also hook up with us on Facebook at facebook.com/The Happy Scientist Podcast, all one word, to get latest episodes and additional material. We hope to see you there.
The Happy Scientist is brought to you by Bitesize Bio, your mentor in the lab. Bitesize Bio features thousands of articles and webinars contributed by hundreds of PhD scientists and scientific companies who freely offer their hard-won wisdom and solutions to the Bitesize Bio community.